Hello and welcome to Seattle City Makers. I'm your host, Jon Scholes. Welcome to our latest episode, everybody. I'm joined by Jim Graham, who is the principal and founder of Graham Baba Architecture, an architecture firm based here in Seattle that's done work around the city, around the state, and around the country, from Washington and New York to Texas and places in between. If you've been in one of Seattle's great restaurants or the Alaska Airlines Lounge at SeaTac, the one that was recently developed at the end gates, or at a market hall, perhaps Melrose or the Great Market in Wenatchee, chances are you've experienced Jim Graham's design talents and those of his team. He has built a incredible firm that I've always had great admiration for, of their work and design and attention to detail. And they work across project types, from food banks to breweries to offices, restaurants, residential, art galleries. There's not a type of space, I think, that Jim and his firm and his team haven't touched and had design influence around. And Jim and I sit down and talk about his path into design and architecture, how he made his way from the East Coast to Seattle a number of years ago, a number of his most rewarding projects and some of the more complex projects, and his first job, as well as his perfect Saturday in the city of Seattle. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Jim Graham, the principal and founder of Graham Baba Architecture. Thanks for making time.
Thank you.
How's your year off? Is it off to a good start?
It is. It's off to a busy start.
Yeah. It seems like everybody talking to it's like busy.
Yeah. Sometimes it's busy trying to be busy.
This is real busy.
Still makes you busy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. Did you get to unplug over the holidays, though?
I did.
Yeah.
Got out to the Mazama for a little bit and up to Baker for a little bit.
So. Oh, nice.
Snow. For
a little downhill and cross country, or
downhill and cross country. Yeah. Separate.
I did not get much skiing in. I should have gotten more, but I got 5 runs in at Alpental. And then my son and I were tired. We're like,
we got a lot of snow in Baker.
Yeah.
It was good.
Yeah.
It was really good.
Well, thank you again for making time for this. I was looking forward to this conversation, and
Me too.
And wanted to talk a little bit about your past and how you got to Seattle, how you got into architecture. I understand it wasn't the first thing you wanted to do growing up. You thought you'd be a doctor.
Yeah.
And then at some point you thought you'd be an astronaut.
Good homework, John.
A little bit of homework. We just try to scratch the surface and then maybe go a little deeper.
Yeah.
And your dad was influential in getting you into architecture.
It's kind of born into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Born into it, surrounded by it.
What was the pivot from doctor to architecture?
It's funny because I was born into that too. My grandfather was a surgeon and started a huge clinic.
Okay.
And so I always thought I would go that route.
Yeah.
And then as it got closer, and it's interesting, maybe it's the power of a single teacher. I was going to be a doctor until senior year, and I had a class in physics, calculus, and computer programming way back when. And it was one teacher. And I'm like, no way, I'm going to be an astronaut. Just out of that. But then I got there and looked frustrated by those core courses.
Yeah.
And the shuttle blew up.
Yeah.
And that timed out well for me being frustrated with classes and going right to architecture. And I don't regret it.
Did you draw growing up at all?
Yeah, incessantly.
Yeah. Well, what did you draw?
Boy, everything from houses to little inventions to little things I was going to build. And kind of being surrounded by it and watching my dad draw. It was probably me wanting to do it, but mimicking him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had a really good sketch hand.
I thought I'd be an architect because I like to draw too.
Yeah.
I drew like race cars. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I drew race cars all the time. And
I drew Jeeps. I had this fascination with Jeep CJ5 or 7.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's all.
But then I just stopped and I got interested in other things. And but I always thought, be an architect.
Yeah.
So then how'd you find your way out here? Because you didn't grow up here.
I did not grow up here. In fact, I finished graduate school and hadn't been west of the Rockies. But I had met some good friends when I was studying in Denmark, actually.
Yeah.
That were from the West Coast. And so I just had to go see it. Wanted to hit the coast. So I just drove out on an exploration.
Yeah.
Right after I finished graduate school and looked at all 3 cities, Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco. And Seattle really Goldilocks itself into the winter.
Mm-hmm.
Not too big, not too small. And really, the mountains and the water. That's what I wanted. I wanted to be near the mountains, but I didn't want to give up the coast or water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you went back home, packed up, and came out this way.
Back up, saved some money, drove out without a job. No one knew I was coming, and got here. I had met. I had seen a bunch of different firms, and I found one that I really wanted to be a part of. So just drove out and knocked on the door.
That was Olson Kundig?
Olson Sundberg at the time.
Olson Sundberg,
Yeah. And finally, there was an opportunity. There's another funny story that's probably too long to get into here, but I'll tell you that sometime. It is a great lesson that I use for recent graduates all the time. Yeah.
The story you're not going to tell us?
No, it's too long. That's where I started and cut my teeth, and it was such a great experience.
What type of work were you doing there?
A big variety. I fortunately landed on some of the early institutional stuff. The one that was, hey, we've got a deadline pushed up, and here we go.
We need an extra
was
hand on this.
The History Museum down in Tacoma, Washington.
Oh, really?
Which was a project that they were the associate or executive architect for Charles Moore, who, of course, coming out of school, like, what? There's no way. Can I work on that? And I was like the junior of juniors, but got put into the CA or construction administration in the trenches for 2.5 years. And with one of the associates there, and I learned so much. I mean, I learned a lot from the architects, engineers, owner, and a whole lot from the drywaller and the welders and the plumbers and the roofers, because I was just on site asking questions incessantly, and was just so eager and curious. Yeah, but that was great.
Were you excited about that gig from the outset, or were you a little bit? I would rather be on the the front end of designing something, and
both. I love putting things together, and so the act of building it is just as exciting for me as drawing it and thinking of it.
And then at some point you go out and form your own firm with no projects, no clients.
That's right.
You hung your shingle.
I had some amazing experience at Olson Sundberg, and got to a point where I'm like, what's next? And decided I'd try my own thing. And so I left with the encouragement of a couple people, and didn't have any work, but that shortly changed, which is great. I mean, I think it was a good lesson for, even after 7 years, getting to know a lot of people. And yeah.
How'd you land the first client, and what was it?
That's a great question. Well, it was really not a panicked call, but an emergency call from a friend who, who said, I have close friends and they just got transferred here to work for Microsoft. They bought this house and they've got, I think 8 weeks in temporary housing, and it needs help. So it was architectural triage, I called it. The patient just landed in the emergency room. I'm like, yes, I can help. So that was really the first active project.
And then what followed? Then
a bunch of others that were, once people, I guess, find out that you're on your own, they're like, oh, can we work together? And
what was it? Was it residential that?
Both residential and commercial,
yeah.
But they were contacts that I had made along the way, and it just started going. I did it as a 2-year experiment to see if it would work, and I figured the younger I was, the more room I'd be given for not knowing what I was doing. And I don't know, it was probably 5 years in. And look back and like, okay, I guess this is real.
You got something going.
Yeah.
And then you started doing work for commercial clients that got you connected to a bunch of chefs, and that's when the restaurant work started.
Well, really,
right?
My first restaurant was working with Pietro and Sabrina on La Spiga.
Up on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, and that's because I had been
space.
working closely with the building owner, Liz Dunn. And she said, I just signed up for this restaurant. And I knew the building really well, but I didn't know anything about restaurants. And so I cold called them. I said, hey, I know the building. I know the landlord. But I've never done a restaurant. And they're like, that's okay. My brother, he's really good, and he's helping me. And it's interesting to think now back, 19 years forward. He was the very first person for Grand Baba. Right? And Francesco's been with us since then. But it was really La Spiga, the first one. And then, projects beget projects, and word goes around.
It's such a great space.
The first years, and it was probably due to the downturn and some projects that we had underway, and we just needed to take anything on we could. Melrose Market was one of those, or Melrose project in general. And God, as it filled up, I think it turned into 11 projects from one, which is great. But we started working with a lot of different restaurants, or chefs, really, which is great. I love those projects.
Do you think restaurant design has always mattered to people's experience, or does it matter more over these last 10, 15,
I don't think it
20
always,
years?
Yeah, I don't know that it always did. And I'm not sure that I'd be the best to say when it actually started, but we certainly saw a change in that about, was it 08, 9, 10? And maybe that's because we were dipping into it, but there was a lot of really interesting stuff coming online, not that we were doing it, that looked different. They were different spaces, just how they lived, than had been previous. I mean, of course, you've got the mother of all, Canlis, and the level that architecture spoke to, but I think that was a one-off that was elevated,
kind of an
but the average stuff was less about the environment and more about the maybe the full story. But you didn't know who did it. You didn't know that it was consciously designed, even though it absolutely was. But yeah.
Do you have a favorite of your restaurant projects?
Ooh, that's a great question. I'd hate to put it out there for all the others. No, Miller's Guild was one that I really loved. And
just behind us,
just
here,
right around the corner.
Was behind us.
Yeah, and I really hated to see that one go. I just loved the environment.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember what was in there before.
It was
the Asian place.
Yeah.
Red something, red.
Yes, I can't
Maybe
remember,
it was just
but
red inside. And
I walked it. And it was.
And had that drop ceiling, and you opened up the
exactly
ceiling heights because you had those huge, huge volume.
Which is a good point. I think a lot of the restaurants that we started doing originally, because they were going into projects we were already working on, and they were existing buildings that we were, adaptively reusing, and we were standing close to the net, and so hey, here we are.
Yeah, I missed that one. That was a great little spot.
Yeah.
Great breakfast.
La Spiga is still one of my favorites too because it's been tried and true and kind of lasted so long. Yeah, love it.
Do you have restaurant spaces that you didn't design that you really admire that stand out to you in the city?
Oh, definitely. Cortina, I really love. I like the feel in there.
Heliotrope, right?
Heliotrope did that one. I think there's a lot that Heliotrope's done.
A lot of nice detail.
Really admire.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, it's been great actually since 08, 09. There's been so many more that are coming into it.
Yeah,
and there's just so much to go around. But it's been fun to watch everyone's practice rise with that, leaning in on the restaurant scene.
Do you think the bar continues to be elevated on sort of
I think so.
The quality and expectation around great design and dining?
I think so. And, it's we can call it design, but it's really what the experience is. And, design is where it happens. I mean, it was always like the beginnings were chef-driven, and they know everything about what they want to do for the menu and cook it. They have some general ideas. How does it feel? But less specific to the design. There are some restaurateurs that know the design really well and know how to get to that environment, but not all of them do. And it's like they're going to focus on what they know to open that place, and we'll do the other side.
Is that generally how they're working with you, of really putting a lot of trust in your execution of a concept on the design and staying out of your way?
Yeah. I mean, it's always a spectrum of involvement and ideas and opinions. And I'm a believer that there's everyone has the best ideas for a project and how you put them together. And you're going to listen to all the team players for sure.
Is there a most complicated project, restaurant or otherwise, that stands out, most challenging over your career with Grand Baba?
Complication has to do with often the building that they're going into. Really complicated. And it may be that their program's kind of small and it's not really that complex, but as it threads through, like the one that we just finished over at the convention center for Ethan Stoll, Bamba. Great, but it's in infrastructure that's about a convention center and at a scale that's massive. So it gets to be really complex and unfortunately burdens like this little project with a lot more than it might need to if it goes into a different building.
Because you're sort of handed a big old shell that someone thought this will work great for a restaurant. But
it's the environment it has to fit into. And so all of the infrastructure has to come from and go through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It turned out great.
Yeah.
Both the lounge and.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
Yeah.
Pleased with it. Yeah.
What else? What's another complicated project that
Well,
really challenged you over your career?
one complicated building to work in was the Amazon spheres.
I was waiting
Down
for
in
you to get
the
there.
bowels of the spheres, right?
Deep
because
dive.
deep dive
Yeah.
and understory. Because at the end of the day, the building was designed to service up top and to be that space, and these little spaces down below.
The food and beverage was going to be.
It was up, but
above ground.
yeah, and I think down below those spaces it was unknown, but complicated building with
And how did
complicated
you,
systems too.
How'd you find yourself doing that project?
Really through the broker that was dealing with the spaces, introduced us to Amazon, and we had done some work prior, but introduced us to the Amazon team. To, what would it be like to be below the spheres, which was a great challenge. Love the building; it's so unique, and it was a great question. What would it be like?
So they proposed the below grade.
Well, it's interesting. The below grade or at grade has to be publicly accessible simply due to the land use code in Seattle in that zone. So it had to be something that was publicly accessible. And
Interesting. Because of their public benefits agreement?
no, it's just the zoning that that ground floor can't be private office or, in many places even residential.
Yeah.
It's about activating the street front and the cityscape.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how it.
So how did the concept of deep dive sort of come about, and what you ended up creating there? What inspired the vibe that exists there today?
Well, I think it was inspired by what's above it, and what would it be like to be below all these plants,
Yeah.
and what would that feel like? And some of it was it's a speakeasy, so what would that feel like? And so what are the charms of storytelling that relates to experience in a space that's so unique or specific. And so I think we took, pardon the pun, but a deep dive down that path into, all the botanical up top and, what would it be like below? And other spaces that might be subterranean beneath something. It was a great journey of exploration just on the design side for the emotive qualities of space and storytelling through the design.
But yeah, it's super cool.
Real fun.
One of my favorites downtown. Yeah. You got a bathroom sink issue in that one. I think you shared last time.
Every project has some bizarre issues. And that was no stranger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's on the boards now that you can talk about that you're most excited about?
That's a great question. We have such a variety, and I think I've been fortunate and feel really lucky that we've curated such a broad mix of projects on the different typologies that we deal with, whether it's private residential or it's restaurants and bars, or we've done schools. We've done, you do adaptive reuse on a building that you want to save and you want to, activate. Well, sometimes it's like, yes, we want to do that. And it's like, well, what are we going to do it with? And it's not clear. It's like, well, a tenant, because that's what we need, a paying tenant. And then it becomes a game of like, well, what fits into the code and also what fits into the market? And maybe with many tenants, what's the, convivial occupation of a single building with many different spaces, and can they work together? I think Melrose Market was a perfect example of that one.
Blurring all the lines and blending it all up.
And mixing them up. And that was a fun one, because really the solution to make Melrose Market was a response to the economic times. It's like, we've got this space. It's too big for any one restaurant at this time to sign it.
To take the whole thing.
So how can it be parted out into little pieces where it wasn't the cost per square foot, it's what's my monthly nut? And wow, if I can share it with a bunch of like-minded people, we can create a space that has more than any individual tenant of that size could bring to it. But that was...
You think we see more of that given the current realities of a lot of vacancy and challenging economics, and of sort of breaking down the scale, sharing the cost, finding economy of scale?
Hopefully. I think that's one solution to it.
You're not designing a Melrose Market too that you can talk about, can you?
No. I mean, I think we've been asked a lot of times to do different markets. And it's, the shared use of spaces that create it, well, at the end of the day, an experience or an environment that people want to be in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, operators, whether it's a restaurant or, retail, what do they need? People, right? And so if you create an interesting space that attracts people, great. And if it's interesting and they want to linger or return, then it supports those businesses. So I think we're always after
What's the market in Wenatchee?
That's Pybus Market, which was a fun project because it was a really tired, old, broken building that was for a very, very different use. And
what was it?
Imagine it was a steel manufacturing business that was uninsulated. It was raw metal. It was like, God, when we got to it, it might have been like Soviet era forgotten structure that had great scale. And we've been fortunate to step into some of these buildings that, like, at once it has the scale and glory of like a cathedral, an old cathedral with the way the light comes in from above through broken windows. But you still have to fix it and make it habitable and satisfy all the current codes. But that was a unique challenge. And I think that the other part of successful projects that I love is their catalytic effect. And what we've been really fortunate in getting to work in a lot of the smaller cities around east of the mountains, et cetera, from Vancouver up to Bellingham. And in small towns, singular projects can have a really catalytic effect on development or the energy in the city, more so than Seattle or bigger cities where one project doesn't make a dent. And there's all the competing projects. And I love the way that can change for the good a small jurisdiction, a small town, and the power of design and the power of, I guess, activating. What does that take? People. Right? It's all about people.
Well, in Melrose, even in a big city like Seattle, Melrose Market had that kind of effect, at least in the immediate neighborhood, right? I mean, it predated the roastery.
Yeah,
right?
Predated the roastery for sure.
And the great retail that now is on Pine.
And it really is all
up and down.
On
the edge there a little bit for when it first
It was
developed. There wasn't a ton going on.
It was one of the earlier ones on that reinvention of all the, historically auto-related buildings on Capitol Hill. I mean, years ago, 20s, it was Auto Row, whether it was sales or service or parts. And there's some great old warehouse buildings, scales that you wouldn't build for people, right? They're built for a different purpose. But when you repurpose them, you're left with these great environments or envelopes. And so, I can list a dozen projects up Pike Pine all the way from Melrose up to Broadway and beyond that were old auto buildings. Yeah. And some were saved and some were not. And it's fun to be a part of it.
Yeah. So back to what is on the boards that excites you that you can share that you're working on now.
Such a variety. Not sure which ones I can share. No, and I say that only half kidding, but also like, I'm gonna be careful here. It's gonna be reserved.
Yeah. No, we don't want to get you in trouble.
Yeah. No, I think it's again always the mix.
Yeah.
We've got some really fun new houses for people, not just in Seattle but around.
Yeah.
Remarkably, there's still restaurants being designed and being built,
even in a pretty tough operating
it's a
environment.
challenge, but at the end of the day, we still need to eat.
Yeah.
And more than that, people want to be together. And, there's been 5 years now or 4.5 of like not being together in the way that we used to. And it's still not back to that, but the spaces need to be there.
What's your perspective on the city today and sort of post-pandemic life, and as somebody who's designed and helped bring forward a bunch of spaces of all different varieties in Seattle?
I think we have a long way to go here in Seattle, particularly relative to other cities all across the country. And it's not, you can't point to one factor. Certainly getting back in the office is a factor. We put people in their offices and they're going to be adjacent to restaurants and retail, but it's critical. I mean, we live in cities because we want to be around people, and there's an efficiency to that. And if you're not coming to the city, it's not going to last. So I think we need to take note of many other cities and how they're successfully doing it. I personally love being at an office with other people And I think there's an efficiency that you can have with a remote meeting, but the energy of all being together, and that's whether it's an office or other activities, we need to be around each other.
Yeah. And as we
that's what cities are for.
As we sit here, Amazon's made their way back to 5 days a week, and
Bravo.
a bunch of those restaurants that you and others have designed are feeling it. They were
bravo.
rocking on Friday night. Yeah.
So I look forward to more of that, but I think Seattle has a long way to go to keep up with others, and should take note of it, because issues that may be occurring currently are so because there's not as many people around, and it's a whole host of other benefits. And you can't blame the building owners for having vacant space. They're not going to occupy those spaces. They need people to.
Yeah.
And in order to have a successful business, you need people. Again, it all comes back to people. And I think we love designing spaces for people.
Mm-hmm. I know you've been doing a lot of thinking around how we can get better at making it easier for things to get built, for new stores and restaurants and other things to get designed and permitted and then opened. Are there some quick wins, some low-hanging fruit to make it easier to repopulate some of these spaces?
No easy answers, but I think if the patient is coding, which our downtown streets are, we need to think out of necessity to things like, all right, for the next few years, we're going to need to change the MO. Maybe make it easier, maybe overlook some of the longer goals that we have about process or improving buildings in certain ways. Not at the sacrifice of safety by any means, but let's get creative about what can happen right now. Because trends are powerful, and if it's trending one way and we need to stop it at the very least, we've got to get businesses back open. And certainly for small businesses, the process of even building it is costly, if not for money, for time. And if we can do anything to save time, which is money, I think the city as a partner to help the time it takes to do these projects, which gets into getting a permit. If we can shorten that, then we can at least give them a fighting chance to be successful. Mm-hmm. But 1 or 2 months late for a delay on a small project, that's make or break. And, yes, you're going to have some that fail. But if that is sort of the scary bar of entry, well, I'm afraid they're going to go to other places where they do make it easier. So we need to change it. We need to make it not just across the board one process, but understand that, yes, smaller businesses and smaller entities can't bear the burden that the others can.
Yeah. And we probably don't appreciate it. Well, I know we don't appreciate the opportunity costs of the folks who thought about planting their flag, but
certainly
weren't confident that they could open fast enough here and maybe plant it somewhere else.
And in the solution to change and get back to where we want it to be, they are true partners because they're boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And they want to. So how can we help? How can we truly partner on that effort that, share the same goals, an active city, a vibrant city.
So you're mayor for a week. What are you focused on?
That's a good question because you can describe it in many ways. But, an active, vibrant city that has a streetscape you're proud of, right? That you want to be in. You want to, walk down the streets and linger in the streets, regardless of if you go into the businesses. But when you do, it's that's how they're successful. They got to get people in the door. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
What makes a great client?
Collaboration, trust. I mean, trust is paramount, right? And knowing, I think that's both sides, right? If you help them be their best in their role, which partly is education. Like if they understand the process, they make better decisions. But if they understand the value that you bring, and that ultimately it's still their choice, then you can help them make the best choices. So I think there's a trust. It's collaboration and trust, I think, makes the best client relationships.
Do your kids want to be architects?
Ooh, good question.
Are they influenced?
I hear noise from all of them at some point, but no one is pursuing it actively yet.
They've got time.
Of course, as I went off to university, my father could say that same thing, and then it changed.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
And he had designed a remodel of your house.
Yes.
And that was pretty influential. Like you got to see, live and experience.
Yes. That was right.
His work. And
I was in kindergarten, and I remember racing home from my half-day kindergarten to take a seat and eat my lunch while I watched all the carpenters
cool.
at work. First job site I really got busy on.
Yeah. Yeah. Just soak it in.
Yeah.
What was your first job?
That's a good question.
I
had, there's all the basic things growing up, but the first actually card carrying job where I went to work and I got a paycheck was, remember I grew up in Springfield, Illinois, state capital. Mm-hmm. I was a page in the House of Representatives. Oh, yeah. And it was a coveted position. Like the precinct chairman was at the end of the block.
You have one of those blazers, like
we didn't have
blazer,
a uniform, but we had to sit there, wait for that light to go on and run up and see what we had supposed to do. And talk about seeing the inner workings of state politics as the sessions went on into the summer, into the late nights. It was an interesting education just in itself. That would be my first job.
How did you land that?
I was next in line with my cousins, to be honest.
Oh, yeah.
No, it was a coveted job because it paid well. It was super interesting. And I think it was a good resume builder depending on what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
And the precinct committee chair was a neighbor at the end of the street. And so she was the in to, at least that representative's nomination for being a page. Uh-huh. And so it had gone through all my cousins and I was next in line. And sure, my brother and my sister followed on subsequent summers. But it was definitely one that everyone wanted to do.
And you weren't bit by the political bug and campaigns.
I left that for my sister.
Officials. Yeah,
she got bit hard and has been in D.C. for 30-something years.
Oh, wow. God bless
her.
And
couldn't do it. It's good education to see how it works, but it doesn't mean you want to participate.
What advice do you give to young architects or folks thinking about going into design?
Make sure you know what you're getting into. Now, I think that I love architecture because of the variety of roles that you can play in the built environment. Mm-hmm. And I was just having, over the weekend, a talk with one of my senior in high school best friends. And it was about, what do we do? And, what do we? We can do a lot. And it's all involved in, the built environment and getting things built, growing our cities or serving someone for just a residential project. Mm-hmm. And I think knowing what you're getting into is important on that. Knowing that there's a variety of things you can do with that. An architecture degree is a great base for a graduate degree, vice versa. Mm-hmm. But God, you can do so many things with it.
Is there a project type that you've really gravitated toward that has become one you're more interested in?
That is a question I often get asked, and my answer always to those people is yes, the typology is the variety.
Yeah.
Because it is a variety, and it's always, and I think the beauty about it is if you are wandering around different typologies, you're always learning something. Mm-hmm. I mean, every project gives you something to learn. And diving into, what is specific about that typology or that client or that site. And so I guess that satisfies ultimately, insatiable curiosity for learning new things. Mm-hmm. You can have a practice that does the same thing over and over again, does it really well. It's just never been what I want to do. And so I like our practice because it does give me that variety. So back to your question, what is the favorite one? That's hard to say. Yeah. It's like, what's your favorite band, John? What's your favorite music type?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I know.
Hard to say. Which I love. And I think we'll continue to try new typologies on whenever the opportunity arises.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there an old building in town that you've like coveted of like, oh, I'd love to get my hands on that, and here are these ideas, and here's what I can do with it?
There's a few, and I guess it's my passion for old buildings. And if we've done a lot of projects around town, the buildings I've walked where we didn't get an opportunity to do it because maybe the project didn't go forward, so many. One of my favorite gems is the old steam plant down on Post Alley.
Oh yeah,
and it is a massive building, and large portions haven't been occupied since the 40s. And it's like walking into a movie set, specific movie sets, Blade Runner 2049. There are scenes of that movie that look exactly like that building does and has looked for years.
What the heck would you do with it?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, what can you do with it? It's one thing, but what would I? It's like, it's got to be occupied with as many people as possible. So would it be partly an event space, partly, is it a boutique hotel?
Nightclub.
It could be a club. It could be, there's a lot of footage in there. So it could be a really interesting variety of spaces that all work together. But
is there another one that jumps to mind? Another building?
Yeah, many. Another one in that vein to reinvent. That's a good question. I don't know if I have a specific answer. That one sticks in my head, though, because we worked on it for a bit and nothing's happened to it. So some of the buildings, it's interesting because you know that there's potential, but it does take money. Yeah. And without the capital, even the best ideas aren't going to make sense.
The waterfront, since you kind of brought us down toward Western and the waterfront with the reference to the steam plant. What's your perspective on the park and project as it has taken shape and is soon going to be all done?
And I love what's going on there, and that makes me proud of the city. And I think if we can focus on that and garner momentum from it, we're going in the right direction. And
do you think it raises the bar on design and influences design going forward in Seattle as far as public spaces?
Yeah, I think it does as public spaces because we're dealing with public space at a scale that cities of our stature should. We should think big. Daniel Burnham, Chicago, make no small plans. And I think that we're not necessarily thinking big enough for theoretically the tools we have at hand here in the city. We have a lot of successful businesses, a lot of capital that could be deployed towards making the city great. And if that's your home, let's make that city as great as it can be. And yes, it does take capital, but it also takes big thinking on the part of everyone in the city, whether it's the city itself and the governmental agencies. But really, at the end of the day, it's those that live here, and they all participate in their own way. But I love what's happening in the waterfront. I think there's a lot of momentum that's going to be garnered as it comes online more meaningful way. I think the catalytic effect that it has on the fringes, whether it's down towards the stadiums or north towards Myrtle Edwards and beyond. I had a fantastic bike ride from Wallingford with my two boys, and it was remarkable. We were on bike paths the entire way down. We spent the day on the waterfront. We went to the aquarium. We went to the market, and we rode home. And we didn't even take the same bike path. And it was like, yeah, that's an urban environment I want to live in. And so I was really excited by it. And, the aquarium's a perfect example of a new building that's taking place down there. I will say that I think there's
about complicated.
Yes, complicated for sure. But there's some great opportunities now that the viaduct is down to reimagine the buildings that really their back end faced it. Now, historically, some of those buildings, it was their alley side because the buildings that were on the other side are gone because the viaduct took them down. Then there's the buildings that were designed after the viaduct was there. So that was their given condition. It's the back end. But now that it's missing or it's gone, man, reinvent, rethink what that is because you're front and center. You're ground zero for the best of the best, which has people. People make businesses work. Right? So I will be encouraged by more on that front. I think that there's a lot of opportunities. They're yet to come, but
yeah, you can definitely envision bars and restaurants and cafes and clubs and big outdoor seating areas in a lot of those great old buildings with a ton of volume, and it's kind of only a matter of time.
Yeah, and I think letting everybody in the city know that it's not just for tourists.
Yeah,
the waterfront previously, at least in my mental landscape was Yeah, I love it. And I used to work down at Pioneer Square and would go there, on lunch. But it was the land of tourists. But it's our city. It should be first and foremost for us. And I think you see examples of that in other cities. Which, if people don't travel, they don't know what's possible because you haven't seen it elsewhere.
Yeah, it feels like those improvements in the park and the overlook and all of that is sort of localized that entire area for the city. It's like, okay, it's relevant to me now as a local.
Yeah.
And only more to come with
Exactly.
the conversions of a bunch of those great buildings.
Absolutely. Yeah. I hope to see that.
Yeah. What's your perfect Saturday in Seattle? Maybe you just described it.
I did. That's
right
one of them for
Yeah.
sure. Coming down to the waterfront, whether it's, even we've got such a climate that bike ride I just referenced was in December.
Yeah.
And we get these days, but talk about the glorious long days of summer, being on the waterfront, maybe seeing a concert. Fantastic. So I think it would involve riding a bike, going around our city, and being in that city environment that we should all love and make the best possible. Yeah.
Being in a place with other people.
Yeah. How about you, John? Tell me about your favorite Saturday.
My favorite
What would
Saturday.
it look like?
It's similar. I mean, it's definitely involves the market, breakfast or brunch, waterfront, sports, live music. Yeah, if I could pack it all in.
Yeah.
And end the night at Il Bistro with a whiskey.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
And it might even be that we've got more waterfront because you could, in that day, hit Lake Union as well.
Yeah. Maybe take out a sailboat from the Center for Wooden Boats. And
absolutely. Or paddleboard.
Go get some oysters at Westward, one of your great
that would be
designed
great.
restaurants.
Yeah. So much that
it's we got a great town.
we do.
Are there do you have favorite cities and urban places to travel in?
Definitely. And I think the importance of travel, particularly for architects or designers or urban planners, is go see it. I mean, we're almost compelled to do so. It's our responsibility. If we're going to affect the civic environment that we all live in, let's see what else is out there, right? And sometimes it's because we can make it better because someone else is doing it better. Sometimes you see how good we are doing things. And when you can come back, you can say, well, no, you can complain about certain things, but we're doing it better than anybody else.
Yeah.
And so as far as cities go, I mean, I love New York. I've watched, how that changed. Chicago was one of my favorites. Paris, I mean, can't get enough of it. Copenhagen, those two for sure. Someone was asking me if I could live in any city in the world, where would it be? And I would say Perth.
Oh, yeah.
I absolutely love Perth. And it's one of those cities that's so far from anything. It doesn't need to compete with anything. It's like, we're doing it here, and this is the way we love doing it.
I was just with
super
last
successful.
night with my good friend that I grew up with who lives in Perth.
Wow. Jealous.
And she's in town for a month with her twins.
Yeah.
And, you've got twins. I've got twins.
There you do. It's a twin club.
Yeah.
No, I think it's important, though, to travel and see those other places. And, one way to look at it is, what is in a similar environment from a climate or from a water, et cetera? Australia, New Zealand, they have some perfect examples of that. Scandinavia. It's like all of the same parameters with which you have to work.
Yep. Yeah.
So, you're like, you go to somebody, some other city where it's like, well, we don't have those assets. It's not the same. But gosh, your city has mountains? Oh, yeah, so do we. Oh, it has water? So do we. You have a nice climate? Yeah, so do we. So it's easy to find a lot of cities that have similar things. Maybe not all of them. But you got to go out and see it. It's our responsibility so that we can bring back, I think, a richer mix of how we then translate all those ideas into ours. But if we just sit here and only are influenced by each other in our own city, I don't know, you're not as good as you can be, in my opinion.
Yeah. And do you think the way, maybe this is a leading question, but the way in which Seattle developed, largely around single-family neighborhoods, and we had this urban village strategy. So, we did create these sort of neighborhood business districts, and then we focused a lot of growth in the downtown. But, a lot of single-family residential that it sort of held back our commitment to great design of urban public spaces like the waterfront, right? I mean, then we go back to the Olmsted Park plan, and they sort of left a big donut hole in the city and didn't do much for downtown. And we did all these big park boulevards and gorgeous parks throughout the city, but it feels like we've lagged sort of high quality urban design in public spaces relative to other cities. And my theory is because we haven't been that urban for all that long.
That's true.
Or at least we were when we began, but then we sort of spread ourselves out.
Yeah. I mean, like if the Olmsteds could have, kept working here and seen the plan even further or evolved it, it'd be great. No, that was one of the first things that I really loved about Seattle. It was amalgamation of many, many different neighborhoods that had their own character, their own little street. I love that still, but it's been hard to see some of them change as they grow up as needed for density beyond what they were, and the character and scale at which it was a neighborhood spot has changed. But we can't for long miss what was, because that's gone. What could it be is the better question. And if it's not as good as it could be, let's change that. Let's make it better rather than complain about it.
And now we've got this train that we're expanding with stations that's having a pretty significant influence on development in the city, right? I mean, and more to come.
Yeah, it's exciting to think about what's yet to come.
Yeah. Well, thank you for making time for this.
Thank you for having me.
And for all the great design you've brought to our city and experiences, and love being in the places that you've had a hand in bringing to life. And thanks for raising the bar on
Thank you, Jon.
Great design in Seattle and beyond, I know.
Thanks for doing this, too.
Well, hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jim. Thanks to him again for coming on Seattle City Makers. He is certainly a city maker in his own right, shaping fabulous spaces and experiences and designs throughout our city and beyond. And certainly appreciate all he's done and his team have done to continue to raise the bar on great design in our downtown. Thank you to him for making time to come on the podcast. I want to close out with a recommendation of something you got to check out in downtown Seattle. And I want to highlight the upcoming 2025 State of Downtown event, produced and presented by the Downtown Seattle Association, which will be held on February 25th, the afternoon of February 25th, at the beautiful Summit Convention Center building there at 9th and Pine. We'll hear from Mayor Harrell and author and keynote speaker Mark Dunkelman, a professor at Brown University, formerly with the Clinton Foundation, an author who will soon release his second book, Why Nothing Works, Who Killed Progress and How to Bring It Back, a provocative exploration about the architecture of power, the forces that stifle us from getting things done, and how we can restore confidence in democratically elected government. I hope you'll join us. More information is at downtownseattle.org. The event is open to all members of the Downtown Seattle Association. I hope to see you there February 25th at the Seattle Convention Center Summit Building. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on this episode of Seattle City Makers, presented by the Downtown Seattle Association, with support from James Cito and production by Spark Creative.